State Representative Cedric Glover is here for a little bit. Mr. Cedric, welcome back. Thank you for taking time.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
Let's start here. Newly confirmed, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg says, hold on, let me find the exact cut, a federal transportation system that frequently cuts through black and brown neighborhoods in order to build freeways, cutting off black and brown populations from economic opportunity. He says that is racist. In your mind, did Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg just say the I-49 intercity connector will never be built, at least while Joe Biden's president?
Well, I think that the Secretary correctly details the history of some of the implications and impacts of the federal interstate system. But I think more so than that, there's just simply not a business case to be made, the history aside, for spending $1 billion on an I-49 intercity connector, especially in light of the last 2 weeks that we've just experienced here in Shreveport. We need to spend $1 billion on infrastructure. It just simply doesn't need to be on an interstate. It needs to be on a water system. It needs to be on fixing the streets of Shreveport. It needs to be on fixing our sewer system. It needs to be on fixing a new Jimmy Davis bridge. It needs to be six-laning I-20 as it comes through Bossier, but not spending $1 billion on new when we have failing and crumbling old.
But one is federal money and one would be local money. How explain to me that how that ties together.
Well, because we have the ability in terms of how these particular systems are coordinated. The legislation itself is crafted and drafted and ultimately passed and implemented to be able to make these provisions however it is that we need to make them. It's been recently stated that what we have facing ourselves right now is an opportunity for this generation's version of the New Deal. It's only in Shreveport where we would think that an opportunity like a new deal would manifest itself as $1 billion interstate system, as opposed to addressing the real actual infrastructure needs that we have right now in terms of what we presently have in place throughout Shreveport, Bossier, and Northwest Louisiana.
Cedric, or Mr. Glover, excuse me, how would you address those who say that finishing that 3-mile stretch would be a huge economic boost to our economy locally? You strongly disagree with that statement. Explain why.
I would tell them to look at the study that's been done by Providence Engineering, the folks who have been paid millions of dollars by the state to make the case for this interstate system, and their own numbers tell you that fewer than 4,000 total cars would traverse that segment daily. Of that less than 4,000, only 235 of them are projected to be vehicles from people outside of this market. The rest would just simply be people commuting back and forth throughout this region. So if you take that as the for the justification, it just simply does not make sense. Not only does it not make sense, it's utterly ridiculous.
Well, we've been planning this for 30-some years. This section was always a part of it. And now we've waited till the final. This is the final leg, and now these strong objections.
No, Aaron, that's not true. There have been people since the 1990s who have been saying that we ought to be actually focused on reclaiming and rebuilding the core of our city. There have been people from the 1990s saying that this does not make any sense. The people who've been saying since the 1990s that we need to be working on fixing the streets of Shreveport, the water system of Shreveport, the sewer system of Shreveport. Let's stop this whole idea of building new, spreading bigger, and believing that we're ultimately going to be better, because it's not the case.
Do you think it's dead with regard to Pete Buttigieg's comments? Do you think this intercity connector is now dead?
It has been dead. It's just simply Pete Buttigieg coming in and simply saying that which is true. You've had 4 years of the most conservative, most Republican administration that we've had in a very long time, along with a completely Republican congressional delegation, and all they've been able to do is to point fingers at the governor for why we've not moved forward on this. That simply makes no sense. People in Washington know it. People here who are enlightened and have ears to hear know it. It just simply takes a former mayor from South Bend, Indiana, to tell us what it is that we all should already know. And should, in fact, be planning to do something different and deviate that actually needs to be done, like fixing our existing infrastructure. Let's fix Shreveport streets. Let's fix our water system so that we don't end up having what we just came through 2 weeks ago. Let's do that, which ultimately ends up being in the best interest of Shreveport, not something that just simply feels good because somebody said 30 years ago that we ought to do it.
Secretary Buttigieg makes a point that you have made for a long time, that there is, in fact, a racial component to the expansion, the building of the federal highway system through inner city neighborhoods. Do you think this racial component has been something that was purposeful, or just eminent domain is eminent domain?
People who lack political power don't have the ability to be able to fight people who are wealthy and who have political power. So when it comes to things like interstates, when it comes to things like chemical plants, when it comes to things like landfills, people who are poor, who unfortunately in America, a disproportion of which happen to be black, brown, and what have you, end up suffering the impacts of these types of decisions because they don't have people sitting in positions of power and influence who have the ability to be able to reflect their views, their opinions, and make decisions that ultimately end up being best as opposed to those that are most expedient.
What about a boulevard through there, or the loop-it approach? Or where are you now?
I just simply think that we need to take the potential opportunity for a huge infrastructure package that's coming to the Congress, work with them in a way that says, as opposed to relegating these to categories for federal interstate systems or what have you, let's look at what the actual infrastructural needs are of the communities that we're trying to impact and make better. As an example, you've got streets throughout this city and neighborhoods that have just simply never been properly attended to. You've got things like, again, as I referenced earlier, Interstate 20, as it runs east through Mosier, it's 4 lanes as opposed to 6 lanes. It's been 6 lanes from Shreveport westward for the last 30 years. That same thing should be happening from the Red River eastward, back at least to Industrial Boulevard. We're about to let a contract at the state to spend $40 million to simply reconstruct that which already is. And what we ought to be doing is talking about how it is that we actually 6-lane that as well, because those are actual improvements and enhancements that actually need to be done and should have been done a long time ago.